Hey all, and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. In this video I'd like to go over my Paladin Healer build, mainly built for Zariel. However, you should be able to run all other content very viably with this build. Keep in mind this build is a pretty high-end game build, pretty min-maxed, and it will be very expensive for you guys to build it all the way up to this level. At least it will take some time. But if you're already up for doing endgame, have all these enchantments and whatnot, feel free to go ahead and use this build. If not, you can always use this build as a reference point and just upgrade things here and there that will contribute to the end goal of this build. So let's first jump into the most important thing, and this is your power setup. If you don't have your powers and feats set up correctly, you'll be pretty ineffectual within combat. Now, as a Paladin Healer, our role is basically, we are the healer in the group. We have to make sure everybody survives the incoming damage from all mobs and bosses. Now, of course, they need to do their part in regards to not standing in daft positions. So we need to use the combined powers and feats to basically fulfill this role as best we can. First up, I'm just going to go through the powers. We start off with at-wills. I generally like to use Valorous Strike as my primary attack power. The main reason for this is I find it a very nice and fluid attack. However, of course, it is melee, so you'll have to be adjacent to the mob or the bosses that you are fighting. Alternatively, you could use Divine Fulmination, and therefore you can stand at further range. Other than that, we want to be rocking our Cure Wounds. Now, we won't really use Cure Wounds a whole lot, as the actual magnitude heal on it is pretty small compared to the amount of healing it generates. Therefore, it's not overly useful, but its divinity cost of only 40, and it's an easy tap on your key, but you will have to directly target whoever you want to aim this at, so it can be quite finicky to get off, but it's just basically an emergency heal button. I generally don't tend to use it a whole lot. For my encounter powers, my general AoE healing power is Divine Shelter. Now, generally I'm running this, let's say in Zariel, because you can heal then 10 people with that same magnitude on everybody, giving that equal shield. Alternatively, you can look at powers such as Divine Touch. Now, the drawback on this is it will divide between an amount of players, up to 5. So if you're running with 5 people and you intend to heal them all with the same power, you're much better off using Divine Shelter. And therefore I use this. Its divinity cost of only 120 makes it so that you can pretty much use this quite often. Combine this with these two encounter powers, Sacred Weapon along with Circle of Divinity, and you can regain that divinity pretty quickly back. Now, I use Sacred Weapon then as my secondary one. The main reason for this is that nice divinity regen. On top of this, it gives that damage reduction of 10%. Now, you would only want to use this if you're making sure you run with the combined feat, that being Enduring Spirit feat there, reducing the damage you take and restoring divinity over time. Now, with our Circle of Divinity, yes, I know it is a small area. We go ahead and we cast it here, and you can see it's this small area and you need to stand within it all the time to make sure you're gaining the buff. And the buff is pretty decent. It's 15% to your outgoing healing along with restoring divinity over time. But if you're running against mobs and such, generally I like to use like Banishment and also Burning Light just to stun the mobs, immobilize them, and therefore they can't hurt your allies. I would use these two instead of Sacred Weapon and Circle of Divinity, and just rock then Divine Shelter as my main AoE heal. Before we go to daily powers, I want to jump to our mechanics. The main mechanic here we have is this tab ability, Channel Divinity. With this, you can essentially press it once to put your Aura of Divinity on a target. When you put your Aura of Divinity on your target, you will see these wings above their head. I can go ahead and put it on top of myself, but I won't see the wings glowing above my head. You will when you're in a party, and you can see the wings up at the top left here, and these will always be right here adjacent to your roll bar. And now with the person who has this mark, you can go ahead and you can channel this power, Hand of Divinity. It has 1,000 magnitude, and it's pretty much our best power for healing single target. It also will raise a big barrier of shield equal to the amount of hit points healed. And you don't actually have to heal, it's the effective amount you heal. For example, I'm on full HP, I can channel this Hand of Divinity. See, I can keep channeling it until I choose to let it go, and it gives me that shield. And that was not a crit. If I go ahead and crit, you'll see I can basically fill my HP bar nearly all the way full. Albeit I am not currently buffed up. I'll tell you what foods and stuff to use, and we can get these stats a whole lot higher. And then I should easily be able to fully shield myself. Continuing on with our powers, we jump back to our dailies. Now our dailies are not overly useful. In Zariel's Trial, Sanctuary tends to be pretty decent, using it either for the white noises or for the scathing light. The white noises also being known as Weight of Virtue. And then for our secondary one, you could easily use Shield of Faith, or you could use Lay on Hands. I like to have Lay on Hands as an emergency heal button, that panic button when the tank is low HP and you can just cast this. However, of course, you could end up just wasting it because the tank could use his Stone of Health at the same time. Moving on to our class features, of course you want to be using that Aura of Restoration, granting you that extra 5% outgoing healing, along with an additional 2% incoming healing received by that person who has that Aura of Divinity mark. Along with that, I tend to just run with Composure, increasing that Divinity regen. The other abilities here aren't particularly useful. Aura of Life is okay, especially when you just want to heal, maybe single target a lot. Now going to our feats. Now the first feat here you want to be using is Critical Touch. Now it is a bit misleading, but it can now also proc with Divine Shelter. You can see if I go ahead and cast Divine Shelter a few times, you can see it proccing there. And now the next Divine Shelter will guarantee be a crit. And you can see here, yeah, the shields are pretty small. Especially if you were playing before mod 19, we could basically fully shield with just like power of like Divine Touch. The other feat paired with that is Sheltered Healing. It's alright, but I wouldn't say it's any good for healing in a trial in PvE. It's alright for PvP, but that's about it really. Moving on to our second pair of feats, we have Prayer Opportunity and Battle Focus. Now at the moment I currently like to use Battle Focus because I just can't be bothered with Prayer of Opportunity. Prayer of Opportunity is like really good because you'll be able to get a free cast of Hand of Divinity, but the problem is to proc this Prayer of Opportunity you need to be casting a heal, and once you've cast a heal you probably don't need to cast another heal, and thus the Hand of Divinity isn't that great. When you do proc Prayer of Opportunity, then you're going to have to cast that Hand of Divinity within 12 seconds or it'll expire, and by the time you release the Hand of Divinity you'll end up just using Divinity to cast it instead of the free cast if that 12 seconds is over. So I generally just run with Battle Focus because you'll just be hitting that boss anyway with, let's say, Valor Strike or Divine Fulmination, and thus you'll gain that extra Divinity regen. Moving on to our third pair of feats, I don't recommend running Spirit of Artistry unless you're just making some hybrid healer DPS kind of build. So just run with Enduring Spirit to buff up that Sacred Weapon to give it those nice effects. Moving on to our fourth set of feats. Again here, none of these are particularly useful. Just run with Divine Intervention because, yeah, you'll basically give them a shield equal to half the amount you heal on Lay on Hands. Now, albeit that shield will equal the amount you actually heal, not equal to half the amount of the target's hit points, which is unfortunate, but that's how it is. The other set of feat there, Coalescence, it's not that great, because you'll be reducing those divine barriers, and your whole purpose is to give those divine barriers, and this will just be removing them while you have it up. Albeit it can have a nice combo effect with, let's say, the Paladin's Sheltering Light. You cast this, everything turns to heals, and you just keep healing a whole load. You heal the tank and they'll heal everybody else, which is nice combo, but you'll have to have that set up and coordinated with the other tank to make sure he takes damage. Moving on to our last set of feats, I highly recommend just using a Mystery of Warding, increasing that effectiveness of those divine barriers, making them a little bit bigger. The other set of feat there, the Divine Vessel, it's alright, but the issue here is it will only proc every 3 minutes, and then it's on a cooldown, and you can get it again after 3 minutes. And in a trial this just isn't reliable. If you could get it every minute, then sure, why not? Because there is a lot of mechanics which have like a minute or so in between before they happen again. And you ideally want, let's say, this power for all those certain mechanics and not just one every now and again. So the then you're just better off using a mystery of warding, which has 100% uptime, just increasing those shields. So that's pretty much everything for powers. Let's move on. Let's go on to our actual stats. Now for this example, I'm going to go ahead and buff myself up. So here we go. I have myself fully buffed up, and these are what my stats are looking like with my current gear. Now as a Paladin healer, what you want to be doing is getting as much power as you can. We hover over it and you can see there in the tooltip it will increase your damage and your healing. Basically for every 1000 you have of power, you increase your outgoing healing by essentially 1%. So power is a key stat that you want to stack to increase the potency of your heals. Top of that, a very important stat is the pure outgoing healing stat here. Now it is very hard at this point to actually get a whole lot of this. You can currently get about 31.5%. Currently only sitting there on 22.5, and I will show you why. On top of this, you also want to keep in mind the power to critical strike ratio. Now in order for us healers to critically hit on a heal, we have to have a certain ratio from our power to our crit. Now in order to get that 50% critical strike chance on our heals, it's capped at 50%, you can't go any higher. You need 25% more critical strike than your power. Or you could say it like this, 80% of your crit needs to be your power, then no higher, and then you'll have that 50% critical strike chance. For example, with me currently with these stats, I'm at a total of 44% critical strike chance. So ideally I would have a little bit more critical strike to balance that out. Now the easy formula for this is basically your crit divided by 2.5 times your power, and that is equal to your critical strike chance. So you ideally want to get this balance. Just do the math and calculate it for yourself. But again, it's literally just 25% more crit than your power. So that's basically it for us Paladin healers. We just want to stack power, stack crit, and stack outgoing healing. Now of course, while you're running the trial Zariel, you want to make sure that defense is capped at 90,000. To make sure you have that 50% damage resistance. The cap is 50%, you can't go any higher, and the reason you need 90,000 is because you need to have 50,000 more defense than Zariel's armor pen, and Zariel's armor pen is equal to her enemy rating, which you see here in the Q tab being 40,000. So 40,000 plus 50,000, 90,000. So we need that defense, like I have here. On top of this, with our ratings, we also need to make sure we have a significant amount of hit points. You can see here, I'm at 550,000. Ideally, you want to be over 500,000 to make sure you can survive pretty much all of the hits within Zariel. Now, of course, there are things which your teammates can do to kill you, no matter how much the HP you have. So the more HP you do have, the less likely you'll keep dying, because when you die, you lose more HP. The more of those revive sicknesses skulls you have. So make sure you have this revive sickness boon, which I will mention later on. You also want to stack that crit severity. You can see I'm at 120% there. However, one thing to mention is that crit severity is reduced by a half for heals. So I would only basically have 60% crit severity on my heals. They would only heal for 60% more whenever I critically heal. This isn't a whole lot, but it's definitely impactful. So that's pretty much it for ratings. Now let's go on to our ability scores. Ability scores is what you will set when you're actually creating your character. However, you can go ahead and retrain them selectively, because when you level up, you gain more points. Now initially I'll talk about the race. Now the race for a Paladin healer, ideally you want to be an Ajmir for that extra 1% outgoing healing. That's it. Yeah, I know, it's only 1%. So you can pretty much choose any race you want, but you'll only be giving up 1%. You could use a half orc, giving you that extra crit severity. That also slightly benefits the heals, and no other real thing does, except of course, when you're choosing your race, you want to get the points within wisdom. This is if you want to be mainly a healer. Wisdom, as you can see there, as its secondary stat thing, gives you outgoing healing. So the more wisdom you have, the more better your heals will be. On top of this, you also want to stack as much dexterity as you can. Dexterity will give you crit severity, and crit severity will essentially give you more of that healing whenever you critically heal. And this is why you want to stack dexterity and wisdom for your ability scores. So whatever race you choose, try and get the points, the racial points within those two scores as well, dexterity and wisdom. Now moving on, let's go to the overall gear. This gear will mainly help you get these extra ratings. So the current gear I'm using is ideally what you should use. However, you should use Infernal Forge Cuisses instead of those Mighty Storm Slippers. The reason I have these Mighty Storm Slippers here is basically to show the power that the Infernal Forge boots give you when they are fully procced. After a little bit of time, you'll have those 20 stacks from these boots, and then you'll have that 5000 power. Now, with regards to all this gear, what you ideally want to be doing is getting as much power on them as possible. Power and hit points. Along with that, you also want to make sure on the off stats there that you have critical strike. Critical strike or defense. You can see most of these, let's say my headpiece there, it's got critical strike. My arms piece, it's got critical strike. My boots, they've got critical strike, and so on. And then you even go look over my rings, they also have critical strike. I'll mention something with the rings a little bit later. Now in terms of the gear that I have, there are a few pieces that I am missing. For example, I would like the Helm of the Skyblazer. The Helm of the Skyblazer comes from tier 3 hunts within Avernus. It is a mighty grind to get them. So I currently do not have them, and this Line Guard Helm does the job pretty well, giving me that 5000 extra power. However, the Helm of the Skyblazer will give me 10,000 power when I'm against a single target, and thus for Zariel it's pretty beneficial. For my armor piece, ideally I would have the Breastplate of the Crusader, giving me that 8,000 extra power when I have temporary shield. I am the one who's going to be giving that shield, so I'm in charge of when I have that 8,000 power, because yeah, I basically cast the shield, my Divine Shelter, I'll have that 8,000 power, and then whenever I do more healing, I'll have that extra power. For my arm slot, yeah, these are pretty much the best around there. You can see I currently have 20 of those stacks. Basically, it will increase your power the more of those stacks you have, but you'll have to actually hit something, and thus another reason to have a damage at will. And for our boots, ideally I would have the Greaves of the Light Guard. These Greaves would give me 7,500 power when my hit points are above 85%. Because we are pretty tanky, we have this shield mechanic here where we can essentially block up to 50% of our hit points. It makes us a whole lot more tanky, and thus we can generally have our hit points a lot higher than everybody else as long as you actually use that shield. So having this extra 7,500 power while our HP is above 85% is pretty beneficial. Alternatively, you can just use what I have here. Moving on to our shirt and trousers. Ideally, I would have here on my shirt, I would have the Brands of the Inferno. They essentially give me 5,000 power when my hit points are above 75%. The other ones I have here, the Infernal Forge ones, I literally just have them for item level. However, I've made sure I have critical strike on them. For my trousers, ideally I would have the Pants of the Hell's Interrogator. It will basically just have more item level, and it will help me cap more of that defense. So I'll be able to lose defense somewhere else, and yeah, basically stack more power. And the pants that I just have here are high item level, so I'm just running with those. But I've made sure they have defense on it to help me stack defense. Now moving on to our weapons. Now ideally you want the weapons with the highest item level to give you that high weapon damage. Now you wouldn't think weapon damage contributes to heals, but it does. Weapon damage is a key factor for a multiplier in any powers you cast, whether it's damage or healing. And thus you need high weapon damage. You can see there these celestial weapon sets is giving me between that 4,600 to that 5,700. So you have that RNG there in how much it actually heals for. It's kind of like a die roll. But the higher the item level, the higher this weapon damage is, and thus the more heals you'll get. Also the set bonus is not too bad, especially for us. We're able to cast these heals off pretty regularly, getting those stacks And yeah, then we'll be able to proc this off fairly easily, giving us that 7.5% outgoing healing and that 7.5% outgoing damage. While we're on the subject of our weapons, we can also check out our weapon modifications. Now for our main hand, ideally we would have Enhanced Cure Wounds. I didn't have it set there because I was on my tanking build. But yeah, we would gain that 10% outgoing healing done by Cure Wounds. And then for our shield, ideally we would have Crit Severity here. Nothing really here else benefits except maybe recharge speed. And then for our stats here, ideally you would go with HP or power. I'm running with HP because this is a pretty good source for hit points. And you need a lot of those hit points for Zariel. Now moving on to our rings. Let's talk about these rings. Now what I'm currently running is to give me as much power as possible. The more power I have, the more outgoing healing I have. The more outgoing healing I have, the more easily it is for me to protect my allies and make sure they're topped off at full HP, and also it'll give them a bigger shield. Now if you look here, this Ring of the Brutal Fiend, yes, it only procs every 30 seconds. An alternative to this ring is literally just a striking ring of the Veteran or Master, giving you the extra critical strike, and that's it really. More critical strike, the easier it is to get that ratio to get that 50% critical strike chance on your heals. For my second ring, I'm using Ring of the Fallen Power. Basically, it's again just giving me more power. I'll just hit my target and keep hitting him, and I'll gain these stacks, and I'll just have more power for a period of time. Alternative to this again, you can just use one of those crit rings. You can see if I just slot these out, it won't change my current stats, it'll just proc up that critical strike a whole lot more to make sure I have that ratio where I gain that 50% critical heal chance. Some would say this is the best way to go, just stacking as much crit as possible. Myself, I see it as it depends. Now the reason you want that 50% critical heal chance is mainly just for this Hand of Divinity. This Hand of Divinity doesn't have the critical touch feat applied to it, so it is only based on your critical heal chance that you'll be able to get this to critically heal. Like when I go ahead and cast it, this is only a 50% chance that this will give me a full shield. Otherwise it'll just give me an abysmally small one. Now you can see the shield there, it's not even half of my HP, and that's on a not crit. When it does crit, I'm full. So that's why you want this 50% ratio. But it depends. If you want to focus on healing your tank as much as possible with this shield, then go for it. Otherwise, if you just want to heal your allies like everybody, that's what I try to do in a trial. I'm there mainly to heal and shield everybody. And healing the tank isn't as important. They're generally pretty tanky and can survive even without those big shields you give them. But it is up to you. It depends on your playstyle. Like sometimes you ideally do want that big heals on that single target for the tank. And other times it just doesn't feel necessary. So I like to just run with this extra power. Moving on to our neck, waist and artifact set. I'm currently running with the Reflective Armament set. Now the reason for this is when I cast a daily power, I'll basically create a rune on the ground for 6 seconds, giving everybody who stands in it a decrease to their incoming damage, and thus I'm helping to protect them. In the trial Zariel, this is very important and is very well utilized, because I'll generally cast, let's say, my Sanctuary either within that Scathing Light or that Way to Virtue, and this is when they will need that damage resistance, and thus I'll basically help protect them. Now an alternative set to this would be of course your Tiamat set. Now this Tiamat set would give you a 5% to your outgoing healing. 5% outgoing healing and 5% incoming healing. It's only really outgoing healing that you're going to really worry about. Otherwise it's just your own survivability. But you can see when I use this set, it puts me just under that 500,000 hit points. Sure, I could run with this, I could switch out to get even more HP like using the Energon, which I can justifiably go and switch out to the Sellsword here, giving me more outgoing healing. And then I would normally then go switch back to my Reflective Armament set. But this is a very viable set to run with, but again it's only 5%. but every little helps in the end of the day. I currently just like to run with this reflective armament set because it just helps to protect those allies a bit more with that extra 5% damage resistance. Okay, so now let's move on to artifacts. This is still on the same character page. In terms of gear, there are a few different ones, but ideally you want to stack that HP. You want to stack that HP and power. Currently what I'm running here is my main artifact is the Sigil of the Paladin. Normally this is the main artifact I use within Zariel. It's a very good defense artifact, giving you that 50% increased damage resistance. It will also heal them over time, basically for 1% of their hit points every second. It used to be really overpowered and used to be like 10% of their hit points every second, but yeah, this got nerfed a while back. For our secondary artifacts, you of course want to run with that artifact that completes your set. For me here it's the Erratic Drift Globe, gives that nice additional hit points and also helps me cap my defense. You can see without this Erratic Drift Globe, I'd be under capped on my defense. I wouldn't have that 90,000. For my other two artifacts, these are purely just for stats. This one, Hadester, giving me that hit points, power and crit. All three of what I need. Exactly the same with the Golden Memories. Hit points, power and crit. Alternatively, if you do have the Storyteller journals, you could switch out to the Flayed and the Frozen for these, giving you that more hit points. It will also give you one more point within Wisdom, basically one more point to all your ability scores, and it'll give you a little bit more outgoing healing. But currently, I can afford it, so I'm using currently the Golden Memories and the Hadester. You can see my hit points are still above the 500,000. So that's pretty much it for gear. Now, there's the last thing I would like to mention here is we move on to our actual enchantments. Now, as a Paladin Healer, as I mentioned, you want as much power as possible. Therefore, you want those Radiant enchantments in your offense stats. More power, the more healing. Ideally, you don't sacrifice anything where you can gain power for crit, and you would just gain as much power as possible and then gain as much crit as possible. So you wouldn't use, let's say, like Azure's here to gain that extra crit. You would use just Radiance for more power. In defense slots, ideally, you again want to just use Radiance. You want to have those Radiance for that hit points. More hit points you have, the more survivability. Make sure you're above that 500,000 if you want to run that Zariel Master. Otherwise, you want to just make sure you have your defense capped for the required zone you're running or the required content. So you would run then Azure's in here for extra defense if needed. Ideally, again, you just use Radiant. For our utility slots, we go ahead and look here. You ideally just want to run with Dark Enchantments. Dark Enchantments will give you that extra Companion Influence. Companion Influence will give you more of your Companion stats and thus more power and more critical strike. Alternatively, if you need more survivability and more incoming healing, you can switch those out to Tacticals, giving you more of that incoming healing and more survivability. However, it's your duty to heal, so it's entirely up to you. If you die because of lack of heals, you can only blame yourself. That's it, really. So if you need the incoming healing, go ahead and stack it. Use Tacticals in your utilities. Those darks ain't going to do a whole lot. It's a very minute buff in like those stats that your companion gives. Last thing to mention here on this page, I guess, would be those armor kits. Ideally, again, you want to run with power armor kits. You can see here I'm running with hit point modifications. Those would be the hit point armor kits. Now the reason again for this is because Zariel, I need that 500,000 HP, and this is a good place to stack that hit points instead of power. And for our neck, waist and rings, I'm just running with stamina regen. There's nothing else here that is gonna benefit you a whole lot more. Now that's pretty much it for that. Now let's move on to another very important page, our companion tab. The companion tab is very crucial to give you a lot of these stats, and it's all based on these runestones and the equipment you have. You can see here my main companion I'm running with is the Polar Bear Cob. This Polar Bear Cob is an augment companion, so looking over here, it will basically give all of its stats to my stats, adding them together. Along with that, because it's the Polar Bear Cob, it has a special enhancement, giving me that additional critical strike and power. The awareness bonus that it's giving is pretty much useless. Now, along with just having an augment companion, you want to make sure you have the correct runestones and equipment. Runestones, you make sure you have those bondings. You want to have those bondings at the highest rank as possible. The higher the rank of the bondings, the more of these stats are multiplied to add to your stats. For example here, each of these bonding runestones is giving me 70% of the companion stats, totaling up to 210%. And because the companion additionally gives me all these stats, I'm gaining 310% of each of these stat points. You can see that amount of crit there. That's crazy. Multiply that by 3, I'm at about 160,000 crit just from my companion. You can see I dismissed my companion, and boom, those stats have plummeted. You can see they're abysmal. I'm no longer capped for Zariel on my defense. My crit has gone down by a ton, and so has my power. So this is why companions are crucial. It's crucial to have those bondings. Along with the companion equipment, this is where you can easily gain crit. Now, you're not able to get companion equipment with direct power, so you just want crit. You can see I have 3 of the Blessed Grimoires. Now, in order to obtain these Blessed Grimoires, they're gained through the Redeemed Citadel campaign. Alternative to these Blessed Grimoires, you can use those gold icons of the companion. These gold icons are farmed through either your Master Expeditions, Warden Expeditions, or even Zariel's Challenge Normal. And these will basically give you that extra crit. It's only a little bit less than these blessed ones just being the top tier ones you can obtain. Now, of course, what you want to be doing, you want to have each of those, and you can see they have double offense slots there, and you want to make sure to slot in those empowered runestones. Each of those empowered runestones buffing that power, giving your companion more power, and thus when you multiply it back over, it gives you a whole lot more power. You can see you have 6 of those empowered runestones, all on the max rank there, 15. And now for our passive companion powers. You can see here I have a whole lot of them slotted here, each of them giving me outgoing healing, except for this Iron Golem. I have the Neverwinter's Guard there, 3% outgoing healing. Additionally, you could have the Quickling here instead, giving you outgoing healing and crit. See, the Neverwinter's Guard gives awareness there, which is useless. The Baby Polar Bear, giving you a nice buff, 3% outgoing healing, and the defense, which is needed. The Ion Stone of Radiance, giving me that 3% outgoing healing, and the Deflect, which is useless, and the Sellsword, giving me that 3% outgoing healing and 2000 accuracy. Again, you could use the Quickling here instead of it. However, the Quickling is mighty expensive and very rare. Now, the reason I'm using this Iron Golem here is because there's no other companion you could use here that would buff the outgoing healing except for a power companion like the Minstrel, 4000 power. That's it. Now, I'm using the Iron Golem because I need the defense it gives, and I also need the hit points for the Zariel Master. I need that 5000 hit points, and I need that 90,000 defense. So yeah, that's pretty much it for companions. Of course, alternative to, let's say, 3% outgoing healing from the Neverwinter's Guard, you could, yes, use your Baby Deep Grow for 8000 power, or let's say you're in a party, you could use the Tamed Velociraptor, giving you that 10,000 power when you're in a party with 5 people using it. Again, for your utility slot, instead of using the Sellsword, you, yes, could use the Alpha Compi, but that's also pretty expensive. And it'll up that power instead of outgoing healing, and thus the more power you have, the more crit you need to have to get that ratio correct. So that's pretty much it for companions. Let's move to our mounts. Now, in our mount section, we have this new system. Now, this new system involves these companion collars and, yes, mythic mounts. As you can see here over my current tab, I, yes, have 100% bolster. Many of you won't have this yet. In order to get 100% mount bolster, you need to have 10 mythic mounts. You can see 5 of them on display here, along with the other 5 back here. Now, as a paladin healer, the actual mount combat power you want to be using is very dependent. Now, it's not going to be a make or break. However, you definitely want something. You want something that's going to buff your party. For example, the Commander T-Rex there is going to buff the outgoing damage of your party. The Ferocious Roars from the Bullet is going to reduce the outgoing damage from enemies. And so is the Piercing Screech from the Griffin. And there's a few more there that is going to buff your outgoing damage or damage resistance. As for our equip power to give extra stats, I like to run with Runic Aura. The Runic Aura will buff me and my companions, giving me 7,500 power and 7,500 defense. And this is a crucial part for this build to cap, yes, that defense. Without it, I wouldn't be capped on my defense. Yes, of course, I could use, instead of this, I could use my dominant force, giving me 15,000 power. But then I would lack defense and I'd have to find some other place to cap it. Along with that, Runic Aura is really good to buff your party. You're buffing them by giving them more power. So moving on to our stable. Now our stable, your stables are probably all going to look different depending on what mounts you have available to you, which mounts you can get and acquire. You don't need all mythic mounts. The only reason why mythic mounts are good is to get that bolster higher, giving you that enhancement higher, giving you that equip power higher, and giving you that combat power higher. The higher your bolster, the higher amount of stats these basically give and effectiveness of your combat power. In our stable, back here again. Now for actual insignias, you want dominance insignias. That's pretty much it. Dominance insignias will give you that additional power and companion influence. Alternatively, you can see here I want these gladiators guile, just for the insignia bonus themselves, extra movement speed. I have had to slot in brutalities. Brutalities giving that extra power, which is good, but it's giving me the armor pen, which I really don't need. So it's a sacrifice I've made to give me that extra movement speed. These both combined giving me 15% more movement speed. Other than that, I'm using Berserker's Rage, basically to just give me more crit strike when my daily power is full. And the second one there will do the same, but at a reduced rate. And the final one here, Shepherd's Devotion, buffing the movement speed of my party whenever I use my daily power. Then finally, for our Mount Callers, there are only a few here. In fact, there are only 2 here which are going to benefit your heals. And these would be the Supportive Regal Collar, benefiting 5% outgoing healing. As you may have noticed, outgoing healing, sources of it, is pretty in short supply. You can see I'm currently only running with a total of 25.3%. And you saw there I can buff it up another 5% from the Tiamat's Orb, getting that to 31%. And this Mount Collar being at Mythic gives that extra 5%. Now, getting Mount Collars to Mythic is fiercely expensive. This would be the last thing you'd do on your build. So at other variants, it's only give 3% at Epic and 4% at Legendary. The other Mount Collar that's going to benefit your outgoing healing is this one here, the Wayfaring Barbed Collar, giving you that 5% crit severity. More crit severity, more heals on your critical heals. And that's pretty much it. The other 3 are literally only there for, yeah, showing off, literally. 5% incoming healing. Why not? More survivability. 5% more damage done by my encounters. I literally don't have an encounter that's going to do damage except Sacred Weapon. So pretty much useless. 5% more gold. 10% more gold gain. Sure, why not? I'll finally kill Zariel and she'll drop some gold. Yep, sure. 10% more. Yay. No, it's not going to benefit you at all. There's no point getting these at all. They're only going to give you more item level, and item level is really not important to anything. If you, at this point, got this far and are upgrading Mount Collars, then you should pretty much have a max build, and you'd have nothing else to spend stuff on, so you'd, yeah, be getting these collars, and you wouldn't need the item level. See, my item level is, yes, insanely high there, nearly 37,000. So that's, yeah, pretty much it for mounts. Let's finally move on to pretty much the last thing, our boons. Again, as I've been mentioning, you want as much power and outgoing healing along with crit. Therefore, yes, you take all the power ones. You take this crit one, and you take all of the HP ones, because you'll have nothing else left to put in their points. You ideally want to get this marathon run on as you go along, because that's 12.5% extra movement speed. That's a massive buff, along with the simple support, giving you that 10% extra companion influence, which is pretty decent. Along with tier 5 up here, you want to get crit severity, and you want to get outgoing healing. The outgoing healing from this has been reduced to really small, there being only at 2% at 4 points slotted into it. For our master boon, it's this or that. It's basically Blessed Resilience or Blessed Advantage. Blessed Resilience is good for healing those tanks because you can basically buff up their stamina. It's also good for DPS when they need to move a lot and they use their shift powers and actually use their stamina. This will help them regain it back a bit more basically on a chance you heal them, you'll basically increase their hit points by 3000, I believe there. And you'll also apply a little heal onto them and basically increase their stamina. It's either this or that. And yeah, they're really pretty small benefits, and they're not going to overly impact your gameplay at all. Going to guild boons, again, you want as much power and you want as much hit points. If you need the defense, you could get it here, but I need 500,000 hit points. Got my defense somewhere else, so I can use this hit points. For utility, for trials like Zariel where you know you might die, you definitely want revive sickness to prevent yourself from losing too much hit points. Every death you take, the lower amount of hit points you're going to have, and the more likely you'll just keep dying. You'll end up in a death loop. You'll die to every other mechanic until you're completely dead. So that's pretty much it for this guide. I know it's been quite a long time, but there is one last thing I need to mention, and that would be my consumables. What do I buff myself with? Well, put it simply, these 4 things here. There is one thing left here, Invocation Blessing. But with the potions, it's Superior Flask of Potency along with Wildstorm Elixir. Using the Superior Flask of Potency to give that 7.5% extra crit severity, along with that little bit more crit. Along with that, I'm using Wildstorm Elixir, more critical strike and more crit severity. And then we're going to the Watermelon Sorbet, giving me more power. This is a huge buff to power. You can see my power's gone all the way up to 220k. Just from Watermelon, it was below 200k before I used it. Along with that, you can use the guild food, Prime Rib, to give more power. Along with these 4 consumables, I'll want to talk about overloads. Now, there are 2 overloads here that will buff your healing, just an incy wincy bit. It says here it will buff your outgoing healing, or your healing by 10%, but that's a false. It'll heal additional 10% on the target. It won't increase your overall healing. It will only heal them for a little bit more, along with this lesser one, and I believe both of these stack together. So this is optional ones you could use. I like to use, however, this Bulwark of Brimstone, increasing my maximum hit points, along with this one here, the Devil's Precision, increasing my critical strike. It does increase accuracy, but whatever about that. Critical strike, the more critical strike, the more likely I'll critically heal. Last thing to mention is on your belt slot for Zariel, you definitely need a health stone. Along with that, I like to run with an Alliance Battlehorn. If I need that daily real quick within 15 seconds, I fire this off and I'll be able to get that daily back real quick. You could alternatively run with another Alliance Battlehorn instead of, let's say, the Caprice, if you're good at, let's say, opening your inventory and right clicking to use it in the middle of combat. So yes, that's finally everything for my build. At least I believe it is. Hopefully I haven't forgot anything. If I did, you can always ask me in the comments below. Hopefully I presented this well. Again, if I did, consider leaving a video a like. And if you're new around here, consider subscribing. And we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.